Hi, I'm Charlie.
I'm Alicia,
Raven.
I'm Zach.
I'm Daniel.
and today we will be presenting about psychological disorders. What are psychological disorders? Well, in 2000 BC to 370 BC, they did not have an understanding that it was a disorder. According to Daffin's website on the history of mental illness, prehistoric cultures held supernatural views and saw abnormal behaviors as the work of evil spirits, demons, gods, and witches. Greek, Hebrew, Egyptian, and Chinese cultures used exorcism to cast out the evil spirits. Exorcism was done through prayer, flogging, starvation, or having the person ingest a horrible tasting drink.
Psychological disorders are characterized by distress and impairment in multiple areas in life. According to Cherry's website on the overview of psychological disorders and how they are diagnosed, psychological disorders is defined as a syndrome characterized by clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognitive, emotional, regulation, or behavior that reflects a dysfunction in the psychology.
While some people do not want a diagnosis because of the fear of social stigma, it is important to diagnose to have a good treatment plan. How are psychological disorders diagnosed? Classification utilizes the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders to determine if a set of symptoms or behavior meet the criteria for a diagnosis.
The disorders we will be discussing today include bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, CTE, and schizophrenia. While some of these disorders like depression and anxiety are more well known, disorders like bipolar are not as well known, which is shown by our survey as responders. Only 58.8% of responders knew someone who had it.
Have you ever felt so worried or fearful that you felt almost sick? If you've experienced this, then you most likely have experienced anxiety. In recent years, the topic of mental illness has become more prevalent, with anxiety being the most common mental illness. So it is important that we know what anxiety is, what the types are, the impact of it, and how we can treat it. What is anxiety? According to Merriam-Webster, anxiety is a mental disorder that entails feelings of fear, worry, along with a sense of apprehension. Also, it can be shown physically by increased heart rate, physical tension, and sweating. Types of anxiety. There are many different forms of anxiety that people struggle with. The most common is general anxiety disorder, which is also considered to be a social anxiety disorder, which is described as a constant and severe anxiety that tends to interfere with one's daily life and activities. The next is panic disorder. Panic disorder is defined as a spontaneous panic attack and the constant fear that they will happen. Additionally, when a person encounters a traumatic experience, they have the potential to develop a phobia-related disorder, which is the fear of a thing or situation. There is also a form of anxiety called agoraphobia, which is the fear of certain spaces and places. One main example of this is claustrophobia. The last is separation anxiety disorder. This is most common in children when they are separated from their parents. It is defined as an anxiety that someone encounters when they are separated from a certain person. Additionally, the statistic at the bottom states that the World Health Organization says that 1 in 13 globally suffers from anxiety. It reports that anxiety disorders are most common mental disorders worldwide, with a specific phobia, with anxiety being the most common. How many people suffer from it? Research shows that anxiety is the most common mental disorder in the US. According to the ADAA, national prevalence data indicates that nearly 40 million people in the US, which is roughly about 18%, experience anxiety in any given year. Additionally, approximately 8% of children and teenagers experience an anxiety disorder and develop symptoms before the age of 21. This shows that college students and young adults who are experiencing a severe transition in their life are most common to have this disorder. Anxiety is a very complex and detrimental illness. It can have a huge impact on those affected and the people closest to them. Anxiety also has many side effects, which include obsessive thoughts, compulsive behaviors, fatigue, insomnia, nausea, lack of concentration, fear, palpitations, and irritability. Anxiety can also have the potential to cause mental and physical damage, which can become permanent when it happens for a long period of time. Additionally, loved ones who suffer from anxiety and the people who have anxiety also experience these damages, according to an article by ABC. Anxiety treatments. Over the years, people have tried many different things to combat anxiety. However, the methods we have set up today seem to be the best at working to better anxiety. These methods include therapy, medication, and self-care.
Today,
overall, with the rise and awareness of mental health, it is important to know what anxiety is, what the types are, the impact, and how to treat it. It is important that people are educated, so even if you personally don't have this anxiety disorder, you know how to help those around you struggling with it, because chances are you know someone who is. In conclusion, it is vitally important that we understand disorders like this so that we can help not only ourselves, but we have the ability to help others. And now I will be passing on to Alicia, who will be talking about the second most common disorder.
today I will be talking about depression. Depression causes people to feel an immense amount of sadness consistently. It can make it difficult for people to get out of bed, socialize with their peers, and even take care of themselves. As college students, we are all faced to get out of our comfort zone, and that can be a very difficult change for some students. Depression is a mental health disorder that affects how people live their lives, and there are a multitude of factors that contribute to a worsening mental health in college students. However, there are also ways to improve depression as well. College life is an adjustment. Students are leaving their homes that they were raised in for 18 years, and they have to completely take control over who they're seeing, what they're eating, and everything. According to Hillary Silver, a licensed clinical social worker and mental health expert, adjusting to colleges influence students' identities. Families are no longer there to reinforce a student's identity, and it can make students feel disoriented, causing symptoms of depression. An overwhelming workload is an additional thing that students have to deal with for the first time ever. And according to Mental Health Guide's website on the mental health in college students, 44% of students suffer with depression. And in the time of 2020, I thought it would only be appropriate to address COVID-19. Students no longer have extracurricular activities or social circle to rely on while they're in college. COVID makes them isolate themselves more than usual. According to Active Minds website on COVID-19's impact on students' mental health, 80% of college students say COVID has negatively impacted their mental health. As well as according to Michigan's medicine website on coping with COVID-19 as a college student, COVID-19 was significantly associated with an increase of anxiety and depression. While not all mental health disorders can be fixed in an efficient way, it is important to reach out for help. Treatments for depression. Exercise. According to mental health guides, up to 75% of students do not seek help for depression. And if it is left untreated, it can lead to even more severe depression symptoms and or suicide. And treatments for depression include things such as exercise, which according to Smith, Robinson, and Siegel psychotherapy, oh my goodness. I'm sorry. According to Robinson's article on mental health benefits of exercise, he claims running for 15 minutes a day can reduce the risk of major depression. Another treatment is nutrition. You are what you eat, and if you fuel your body with good food, then you will see the benefits. Another treatment for depression is psychotherapy, aka talking to a therapist. According to Smith, Robinson, and Siegel, psychotherapy, it can help give you skills and insight to help you feel better about yourself. Depression causes people an immense amount of sadness that affects activities in their daily lives, but there's always a choice for reaching out for help. We are all human and we all have our own individual flaws, and depression causes people to not act how they usually would. It's always important to make sure that you look after yourself as well as the people around you. I will now be passing it to Raven, who is talking about bipolar disorder.
Yeah, so a lot of times when you hear bipolar disorder, people automatically think of mood swings, but it's honestly a lot more than that. Bipolar disorder is a serious mental illness caused by multiple factors and can affect the brain and body, and can be treated through doctor's orders, or you can learn how to manage it yourself, which is what I will be talking about today. So yeah, causes of bipolar disorder. The causes of bipolar disorder are not 100% understood by scientists. They are only theories, but they are genetics, neurochemical factors, and environmental factors. So yeah, when you think of bipolar disorder, a lot of people say, oh, it runs in the family, and that is because of certain gene mutations that are inherited, and variations in genes can combine to increase the risk of developing bipolar disorder. An example, according to PsychCentral.com, half of the people with bipolar disorder have a family member that also has bipolar disorder or just another mental illness in general. And some examples, if one parent has bipolar disorder, their child has a 10 to 15% greater chance of getting it. But if both parents have the disorder, the risk increases by 30 to 40%. Yeah, so for neurochemical factors, a little background information about the brain. The brain does use numerous chemicals as messengers to communicate with other parts of the brain, and the messengers are called neurotransmitters and are essential to allow the brain to function. And scientists that have studied these neurotransmitters confirm that their chemical variances and location can impact those that do have bipolar disorder. And some of the chemicals are dopamine, serotonin, glutamate, and so many others. And those chemicals in the brain seem to be unbalanced in those that do have bipolar disorder compared to those that are not diagnosed. So yeah, environmental factors. This is more of the unsciency reason as to why people have bipolar disorder or bipolar episodes. So for conflict, this just means, you know, something happens, you had a bad day, and it can trigger an episode. And then without a clear understanding of the person's genetics, a change in health habits may influence bipolar disorder. Keep in mind, these are all scientific theories and have not been proven, but the change in health habits can include hormonal changes or drug use, alcohol, or use of hard drugs. So effects of bipolar disorder, most people think it's all in the brain, you're just going to get sad, but that's not necessarily true. It also has the potential to affect all areas of the body, and it also varies from person to person. Not everyone has the same effects. To start with the brain, it can cause you to get more sad than usual, a depressed state, suicidal thoughts, which is considered an emergency situation. If you are thinking about killing yourself, you should, you know, get some help. But that also includes self-harm, fatigue, and hyperactivity. So moving on to the human body, like I said, it does not only just affect the brain, it does affect the heart. You can it can increase a heartbeat or a pulse. And a heartbeat may increase because of the hyperactivity that I mentioned before, the nonstop wanting to do something. And then it can also change a person's sex drive. According to Medical News Today, people could experience hypersexuality or have a lower sex drive. So for the skeletal system, bipolar disorder does not directly affect the skeleton, but bipolar disorder can lead to depression, and depression does. So it can affect your bones and muscles and cause you to have aches and pains. And then with the gastrointestinal system, this is where your stomach's hurting, you may be throwing up. That's associated with the anxiety coming from bipolar disorder. A nonstop panicky feeling can cause you to get sick to the stomach. So other effects, substance abuse may be effect of bipolar disorder. People may feel the need to use drugs or drink alcohol to cope with it. This is kind of a fun fact that I liked. According to Healthline.com, people with bipolar disorders seem to have more spending sprees than people with don't, which is kind of funny. And then it could affect a person's performance, whether that's in school or work, and it could affect relationships or friendships. So how to cope. This could be going to the doctor and getting their professional advice, or learning how to manage it all by yourself. So doctor's orders, example, that's medicine. Not everyone has the same reaction with medicine. Some people may think it could help, and some others it makes it worse. You could just go get help from a counselor, or in extreme situations, they may put you in a mental hospital. And then self-management, developing a schedule every day could help. The same routine could help your moods. Self-care, taking a bubble bath, spoiling yourself, it could just lift your mood some. Exercising can help with almost any mental illness, so that's very helpful. Obviously, avoid drugs. Drugs are never good to use while you do have a mental illness. And according to Recovery Village, unfortunately, 60% of people with bipolar disorder do use drugs or alcohol to help cope, which is not good. And then referring to the survey that some of you guys answered, 93.9% of you guys do agree that a schedule and a routine can help those with mental illness, as well as self-care. So yeah, according to the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, 5.7 million adults are affected, and that's a lot of people. And just like someone that almost everyone knows, Demi Lovato has bipolar disorder. So, really, like, even famous people are affected. I know it's like hard to believe that people you look up to have mental disorders, but it's really common. But it's good to remember that if you do have it, it's not your fault. It's caused by genetics, neurochemical factors, so much stuff, and it can really affect anyone. So it's important to keep your mind open and try to be supportive of those that do have it. So bipolar disorder and schizophrenia exist on the same spectrum. So now I'm going to turn it to Zach.
Okay, so schizophrenia is not that well known by society, and because of that, it causes people to have a stigma around it. However, when you dive deeper into the subject and the disorder, you realize that it's not what it seems on the surface. So what is schizophrenia? According to Webster's dictionary, it is a mental illness that is characterized by disturbances in thought, perception, and behavior, by a loss of emotional responsiveness and extreme apathy, and by noticeable deterioration in the level of functioning in everyday life. So what are the causes of schizophrenia? The causes of schizophrenia are not completely known by scientists. Researchers have theories, but none can be deemed the main cause. Suspected causes, however, include genetics, neurochemical factors, and it's believed that environmental factors have a huge role in whether or not a person develops the disorder. For example, according to Lauren Kennedy, an adult living with this disorder, weed can cause psychosis, which can lead to permanent schizophrenia. What are symptoms of schizophrenia? There's two types of symptoms to schizophrenia, positive and negative. Positive symptoms are things that are added on or like in the presence, and negative are things that would be in the absence of someone's life. And according to T.J. Crowe, a British psychiatrist and researcher from Oxford, someone who shows more negative symptoms is more likely to have a more grave prognosis. However, some of these other symptoms include hallucination, delusions, confused thought slash disorganized speech, trouble concentrating, movement disorders, and then for negative, lack of pleasure, trouble with speech, flattening, which is when a person does not express that much emotion, whether good or bad. And then going along with that, withdrawal, when a person withdraws themselves from relationships or activities. Someone could struggle with daily basics such as getting up, brushing your teeth, and also no follow through. So they lack motivation in everyday basic things such as that. Effects of schizophrenia. The effects of schizophrenia lead to extreme physical, emotional, and behavior miscues, which greatly impact everyday life. According to the helpguide.org, effects can include depression, anxiety, substance abuse, poverty or homelessness, social isolation, phobias, and even death. And death does not mean that schizophrenia is a fatal disorder. However, because of the symptoms that come with it, there are a lot of deaths that occur as a result from having this disorder. Possible treatments of schizophrenia. So, according to Pacific Grove Hospital in California, the cornerstone way of treating schizophrenia is antipsychotic drugs. However, you can also participate in psychotherapy, psychosocial therapy, which is interacting with other people rather than learning how to deal with the disorder yourself, which is what psychotherapy would be. And as well as you can participate in something called electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, which is, as pictured, a series of electrical surges into your brain which induce a seizure. And this works because it reboots the chemistry in the brain and helps with symptoms like depression or anxiety. However, with full-blown schizophrenia, the success rates with ECT are low. And schizophrenia is very much a behavioral disease, and CTE also affects your behavioral patterns. So now Daniel will tell you more about that.
Did you know, according to Barry Bowden from the National Library of Medicine, that 8 people die per year from direct related trauma to the head just from playing the sport of football? Yeah, that's right. A sport is causing people to die every year, even though it's considered one of America's favorite pastimes. which leads me into my first point that CTE is the main psychological disorder that football players are getting from playing the sport. CTE is a brain-related disease that leads to other psychological disorders such as memory loss, depression, and death. And according to Alexandra Saferline from Time magazine, in an article that she wrote about CTE, 110 out of 111 deceased NFL players whose brains were studied on and conducted research were found to have CTE in them. That's 110 out of 111. That just goes to show the damage that these football players are receiving just by playing a game. So this is why the NFL and all levels of football must completely eliminate the full body contact of their sport in order so we can prevent these athletes from getting CTE and honestly losing their lives in the future. We need to save these people. So the impact of this is that these players are receiving a huge amount of impact to the head from playing the game. According to concussionstatistics.org, and a study that they recorded, high school football accounts for 47% of all sport-related concussions in the entire sports industry. That's nearly half of the amount of concussions in the whole industry from high school football alone. And that doesn't even get into the NFL, as we see on this graph here, how many NFL concussions occur per year. It's around the average of 250. So this is another reason why we should convert from the sport of football to completely eliminate the contact, because if we did, it would reduce the amount of concussions that these people are getting. Their brains are honestly the most important part of their life, because that's what controls everything inside of their body. So this leads me into my next point, that not only has the CTE caused these players to have terrible side effects of their lives, it also has allowed them to commit suicide, as well as this is one prime example of Aaron Hernandez. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Aaron Hernandez, but it was actually a Netflix documentary just made about him recently. Aaron Hernandez was one of the best football players in the world. He started out at the age of 13, winning the award for best youth football player. And then he later on decided to play for the Patriots, where he signed a $40 million contract. And right after he signed the $40 million contract, he killed his best friend. And later on, when he was in jail serving for that time, he actually killed himself while he was in jail. And so after he died, doctors were able to conduct research on his brain. And according to Nicole Embedder from PBS.org, an article written about Aaron Hernandez, she found that she wrote that Aaron Hernandez had the amount of CTE in his brain was significant to those on average of people in the age of their 70s. And Aaron Hernandez was only 23 at the time of when he committed suicide in jail. So that just goes to show that playing football at a younger age is really just going to cause not only trauma to the head, but these athletes to act in a completely irrational behavior in ways that they would never usually act. So by eliminating the contact within the sport to the head, none of these athletes would act like this, and they could live these normal lives that they're not normal lives, but they're glory lives that they're supposed to have. Like a $40 million contract should not make a person want to kill themselves, essentially. So this is why the solutions for this needs to start with the NFL, the professional league, implementing the rule change, because once they do, the rest of the age groups will follow from college to high school, youth football. But we're struggling trying to get the NFL to really sympathize with their players, because they just really care about the money that they're making. According to Associated Press, an ESPN article, when the NFL was pressured to make a rule change on the stance regarding the brain damage that their players are receiving, they decided that their number one rule change that they were going to make was changing the kickoff line from the 30 to the 35-yard line. And that was basically it for changing the rules. They are taking this as a joke, and it needs to be treated with more and more regards to sympathizing with these players. As we've seen, not only Aaron Hernandez lost his life, but there's been 5 other athletes who have committed suicide from CTE as well. So this leads me to say that other people will, like, the counter argument for this is that if you take away tackling in the sport, it makes it so it's not like any skill is required to play. So there's other ways that you can still play football and required skill. For instance, flag football, you still have the same essential components of playing football, which is throwing the ball and catching it without the contact. That's a safe way to play, is flag or two-hand touch, which would, if these were implemented, none of these athletes would have this terrible toll in their lives. So that brings me to my conclusion why the NFL needs to act now. The time is now for this, to completely change the sport of football and make it a non-contact sport to the head, so we can eliminate CTE within these athletes and additionally save these athletes' lives and eliminate the suicide that these athletes have partaken in, such as Aaron Hernandez, as I discussed.
Okay, so additionally, as Zach previously stated in our introduction, there needs to be a lot more awareness brought to not as many well-known disorders such as bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, as these aren't well known because, as our survey stated, only 58% of people knew what bipolar disorder was, and additionally, only 11% of people knew what schizophrenia was.
So even though all of our psychological disorders are different in their own ways, they all tie together in the sense that they have negative effects on people's brain and the way that their body reacts to it. And we need to come up with solutions in the future to really help with these people cope with these psychological disorders, because they're really prevalent issues in today's society. Thank you for watching our presentation, and I appreciate you guys taking a listen. Hopefully the audience is now informed more about psychological disorders and see how big of an issue it really is.